Today we're going to make a square faceted porcelain cup. There's some of these on the website, you can see on the shop site. And I was going to show you how I throw it, facet it, trim it, and then do the painting with slip. So we'll just start off with, normally if I was going to make some of these I'd have a bit more clay because I make them off the hump, which is a technique of where you throw multiple pots off a single mound of clay. So I'm just going to kind of hunk off the amount of clay I think I want to make this cup. So you see I'm not going to center the entire amount of clay. I'm just going to center this top part. I'm throwing on a treadle wheel, and that's a foot-powered wooden wheel with has a wooden flywheel, which is not very heavy, and yeah, it's kicked like this. So I kick while I throw, which is a little different than some people. Most of the kick wheels that people are familiar with have a heavy flywheel and you kick and then you throw. But this you're sort of kicking while you throw, which I think is it's a nice thing because your lower and upper body are involved in the process. So this is the part that's centered here. I'm going to make the sort of shelf of where the bottom of the pot will be. And I'm just going to open it up. Pull it into like a little bowl shape. And actually squeeze this down a little bit to make it narrower. And do another pull. And I want these finger marks on the inside to be nice and spaced apart. I don't know if you can see that. I'm just going to shape this, close it up a little bit into the shape that I think it needs to be. And I'll take a rib on the outside, kind of rib off these finger marks, these throwing marks, because when I go to fasten it, it's not going to help me if I have ridges, like you can see here. If I was cutting through that and it was on a corner, it wouldn't really help. So I'll just take this trimming tool, which is a little loop tool, a nice Dolan tool, 510S is what it is, I believe. Just take off a little bit more, dry off that outside surface. Make sure that there's a nice drinking lip in there. I'm just going to take my finger and I'm going to make some lines pushing out northeast, south, and west, kind of as evenly as I can, dividing the spaces. And then I'll just kind of get this going into the squared off shape that I'm going to want it to be. Just kind of get it started. See, there's a tendency for it, because you've thinned it out where you pull it out, for it to kind of almost fold on those lines. And so that'll be a good start. And you can see that while I'm calling it a square cup, it's not entirely square, right? It has some curvature. So it's a nice kind of transition between the roundness of the thrown part and the round parts into a softened square, which is, you know, you sort of get that at various points in the pot, like along here, along this trimmed line, and maybe looking in at the thrown ridges on the inside. So that's just going to be cut off the wheel head. Just going to make a a shorter wire to do this. I'm just going to pop that in there and kind of gently pull it towards myself. And you should be able to get a pretty flat cutoff with that. And there's plenty of clay in there to make a foot. You know, I've left probably that much clay down there for that. So we're going to let this dry up. I'm going to facet it and trim it, and then I'm going to show you how I paint them. All right, so we dried this outside a little bit, and normally you want to dry these kind of slowly because it makes it more even, easier to cut, but I'm going to start by just paddling this a little bit to get the inside shape of these corners. Try to get that fairly symmetrical. Now I've got this knife, which is it's a knife that it's an old non-stainless steel, bread knife or something. And I added this very elegant handle, which I made with electrical tape and 2 pieces of wood. So I'm just taking off a little tiny bit of this edge. I'm trying to make this line plumb so that it doesn't wander off to one side or the other. And I threw this a little thinner than maybe I'd like, but I think it'll work. But what I want to be looking at is this, that this edge is fairly, because I'm removing material, that it's fairly consistent. I'm just taking off a tiny bit here.
Just compared to the inside
of
the rim.
I'm looking at the inside of the rim and just, as I say, I threw this cup a little on the thin side, so it's maybe a little thinner than I like, because these are generally kind of more of a teacup. I do want them to be a little bit thick to insulate your hand from the hot liquid. And so you see I'm trying to get this line to be fairly plumb. It doesn't have to be perfect, because I think with a lot of these things that are that repeat something, like you have one side and another side and another side, a lot of the pleasure is that they're similar but not exactly the same.
And you're bending that knife as you cut?
Yeah, I'm holding it. That helps me control it. And you want to shoot it from the top here. Move the camera over. And you see, I'm also using my body, my fat belly, to prevent it from sliding off. Because if I didn't have my body there, it would just move all over the place. So it's kind of like a way of holding it down. Okay, so now we're going to trim it, put a foot on it, so you can see how far we've come. And this cup's a bit smaller, quite a bit smaller than this cup. But
you never finished throwing any more that hump of clay.
No, this hump of clay is going to work as a chuck to trim this pot. So put this down here. I'm just going to take this and just. I'm not going to add any water to this because I don't want it to get sticky. Something like that. can sit on top of there. I'm gonna just kind of tap center that on. And we'll cut the foot. So I'll look at this and say, huh, well, that's pretty centered. Yeah, that's pretty good.
How do you know where the, well, say the bottom of the cup is that you don't
I'm
trim?
gonna find the bottom. I have a sense of where it is, but I really don't know where the bottom is until I start cutting this, removing material from this part of the pot. And you can see I'm kind of giving this a little support as well. So now I'm going to start pushing on this, and when I feel that that's starting to give a little bit, then I know it's pretty thin, or getting thin enough. And I like that little tear out there. Can you see that?
Yep.
Can be a nice detail. And I can feel this is starting to move a little bit. So I would say that's pretty good to go. I'm going to sometimes when the clay is pretty soft, especially with porcelain, it's hard to cut a really flat line here because it jumps around a little bit. But and there's all kinds of different feet you can cut. This one's kind of a foot that continues the movement towards the table. But you can see how nicely that kind of sticks down and then pops back up. And you can see the foot. It's not the worst foot in the world, not the best either. So this is a little different than this pot. This has more of a straight cut foot, but I think that's actually kind of nice. There's a fair amount of weight in the bottom, which is kind of nice too.
Would you go back and kind of facet more if
Well,
you
you can
needed
see
to?
this facet didn't make it all the way down, so we'll just put this back on the banding wheel and make that line. You can see that. So all these other ones. So I would say that's probably the last thing would be to soften this edge just a little bit so it's not too sharp. And I don't know, feel it. It seems good. Good enough. It's
Put a stamp on it?
put a stamp on it. I'll show you.